G'day guys, welcome to episode 9 of the Composite Shop Surf Kayak build series. This week I'm actually going to be finishing the combing clean up on the combing of the surf kayak, and also working on fitting the leash mount points for the end grabs, that obviously the handles that are going to make this kayak a little bit more manageable in the surf conditions. Now the idea of this series came to me a long time ago. I've had a lot of people that have bought kayaks off us and asked, how do we make these kayaks? Now there's a lot of detail in making these surf kayaks. They're all handmade products, so it's very important that we take a lot of time to get the detail right, and over the years you tend to develop little nuances and skills that certainly help you get that product right at the end of the day. So thanks for joining me. Don't forget to like the episode, don't forget to subscribe, and there's a lot in this episode, and obviously we're heading towards the end product here, so really exciting for me, and there's going to be a lot more coming on this channel. Hop over to Life on the Hulls as well, which is my composite catamaran build channel. I'm actually building it about 50 meters away from here, 42-foot catamaran, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It's a monster project, and if you want to see how these big fiberglass catamarans that you see sailing all around the world is built, there's 119 episodes as of today up on the site. So Life on the Hulls, subscribe to that as well. Let's get into it. Okay, so we've done the external seam and it's come up just perfect, so I'm pretty happy with that. Next thing I need to do is start working on around that cockpit rim and just ensure that I get it all smooth and ready for finishing. So there's quite a lot of rough texture in here that I need to smooth back. There's a lot of sanding needing to be done within the kayak to make sure there's no sharps or anything before I can go into the final fit out, which is the foam pillars, the seats. I've got to do an end pour into the end here to make sure that I get all that glass up in the end where I couldn't quite reach it, all tied it up inside. And I usually do that with a resin pour, around about half a cup of resin mixed with Q-Cell. So there's a lot of things I've got to do now to finish this boat off. It's not far from being finished, but certainly needs to have that sort of final tweaks to make it a saleable product. A lot of finishing needing to be done around this area here. If I run my hand under here, I'd already sanded this externally while the combing was facing up to me, but now when I run my hands under there, it's still quite rough, so I need to give that a good sand. Also need to trim off this excess gel coat here and excess glass that I wasn't prepared to get rid of earlier. So there's a lot of cleaning up, and then I need to do a final trim and sand around the outside rim here to make sure that this is beautiful and smooth so that it doesn't destroy his spray deck, and certainly isn't going to cut him in the process, because at the moment it's still, as you can feel, quite sharp. By rounding that and sanding that and smoothing it with wet and dry sandpaper, I can make sure that this is a really, really beautiful finish. And then I'm going to give the top, because it's had a bit of work on it. You know, I've been lifting the boat up and down. There's a couple of fine scratches in here I want to make sure are gone before I give it a final polish. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to start working on the inside of this and make sure that I get a really top quality finish. One of the things I like to do is prevent further work later on when I'm doing these, because I've done so many of them. I know where I'm going to end up with problems, and one of those things is actually getting any water inside on that bottom substrate. I don't want that getting wet at all, because later in today I want to actually install the center pillar, do the end pour, and any water in there will affect the chemistry between what I'm trying to do and what I'm about to do. So I'll put a towel in here inside the cockpit and pretty much cover the whole underside of the boat. Where that benefits me is it will also catch any dust that's going to land in here as I'm sanding. Okay, something to consider as I'm sanding by hand here. I need to be very careful I don't scratch my beautiful black gel coat. So it's just a matter of take all care and all responsibility when you're building something for somebody like this. You know, they want a perfect product. I want to deliver a perfect product. I don't want to have to be doing restorative gel coat repairs on something that I've just produced perfectly to start with. So look, unavoidable when you're joining parts onto other parts, you're going to get the odd little scratch and nick, but it is possible to polish these out. So I take some 60 grit sandpaper by hand. Everything's done by hand. I don't use a machine at this stage, because a machine will be very easy to just run off and give this a scratch. All of a sudden I'm going to have to do some repairs. So I'll then start to, obviously with a mask on typically, I'll start to sand and smooth out any sort of irregularities underneath the combing here, because remember his legs are going to be up underneath here. I want to make sure that there's absolutely nothing there that can catch on him and obviously cause him an injury, and certainly you don't want to be running your hands under here washing a boat out and get a big shard of fiberglass. So 60 grit sandpaper, get the bulk of it down with that, and then I can work forward through my papers. So, I'm only doing a small section at a time. I don't try to do the whole thing at once. And the other thing I'll do is I'll push towards the outside of the boat up underneath to save me a chance of me scratching it, losing control. Because once you're applying pressure onto something, and I'm not sanding hard, I'm just sanding very consistently within the confines of the cockpit. Getting a really good finish just by feel, and you know, again, your fingertips are your eyes. You basically can't really see what's going on under there, but you can really feel it, and feeling it is often better than seeing. So this area along here, this razor sharp edge has to be removed because there's a thigh brace that actually bolts in under here. So I find that at this stage, using a Dremel with a snake and a barrel sander with a vacuum is a really good way of removing that quite effectively and quickly, and it allows me a lot of control. It can't be stressed enough that at this stage you don't want to damage the product, so it needs to be a really fine control tool, and something like a Dremel is really the only answer. You don't want to go and attack that sort of thing with an orbital or a belt sander or a rotational sander, because there's a good chance you're going to gouge out a part that you really don't want to. It's almost like dentistry work when you get to this stage. We want to make sure that we get a beautiful finish here. So very fine control tools, always the key. Now, I start to get really protective of a product at this stage. I don't even like anyone coming in the shop in case they knock something over. This is the stage where caution is so vital. Really, to put a new combing on that, if we were to damage this, it'd almost be quicker to build a new boat. It doesn't take much to take it from this sort of a whole heap of excess glass and rough edge, and you can see there the raised gel coat there where I didn't quite trim it from the mold, to something beautiful and smooth like that. It's just a bit of sort of really fine work with a Dremel and a roller sander, and I'm able to return that from that to that, and it's almost perfect. So I'm going to give that a light sand with some wet and dry sandpaper, and ultimately this combing is going to be done. Okay, so I've been working on this combing for about 45 minutes and I've got it all nice and smooth. What I did is I started off with a 60 grit and got rid of all the rough dags. I went up to about 400 grit, wet and dry, and I've wet and dried with my fingers only, and I used a block to just tidy it up. And I'm going to show you the difference now compared to what it was a moment ago, and now I'm up to 1200 grit. So it's only a 5-minute job per gradient of sandpaper, but what happens as you get higher and higher is you get that beautiful luster back into the product. Okay, now that I've pretty much got the boat finished, it's now time to start working on the fitting out on the inside. The first thing I need to do before I can put a central pillar in there for support, to support the hull and the deck from imploding in a large wave, is I need to pour around about 100 mils of resin mixed with Q cells, so around about 200 mils of filled resin into the end of that kayak. And what that does, it makes a solid join, and a solid end pour will make a big difference to the construction of this boat. Remembering when I was poking those two tapes in, there's a good chance it's going to be all fibrous and dodgy up in the end there. You can never get it right because you can't reach it. By putting an end pour in there, it will consolidate any loose fibers, and it also give the boat a very strong nose, which is going to be the point of impact in most situations, i.e. other boards, rocks, sand, if he ever goes over the falls, if he ever nosedives a boat. So we want to protect that, and an end pour is pretty critical. I do it with all of my sea kayaks. I do an end pour on both ends, sea kayak nose and on its stern, making sure that that is a really, really solid joint in that end there. I've seen kayaks actually separate where they haven't been end poured with resin. So it's one of those things we do. It does add a tiny bit of weight to the boat, but what it does do is it gives the boat an incredible amount of strength that you wouldn't otherwise get, which is near on impossible up in the nose of that kayak. First things first, very important, couple of things you need to know before you pour some hot resin into the end of that. We are talking a lot of heat about to be introduced into the bow of this boat, and what that heat could possibly do is distend the gel coat and make it a little bit cosmetically ordinary. So I've come to the conclusion that by keeping the temperature down and letting the resin cure over a longer period is a very, very good solution. I mean, it really doesn't matter what temperature the day is, this stuff's going to get hot regardless. So what I do is I sit the nose of the boat in a bit of cold water. It helps to dissipate the heat better and allows the exotherm to be a bit slower in its reaction and minimises the chance of having warped or damaged gel coat on the outside and affecting the laminates in between. We don't want to add too much heat. I'm going to add a big block of resin. I don't want to go damaging all this beautiful work I've done. So I'm going to lift it into place. Slide my bucket in and just sit it in place there. This is something I've done with every kayak I've ever manufactured, bar the first one. The first one was a major problem. I put it in there, poured it, catalysed it about 2%, blistered the gel coat. Now that can happen, don't believe it won't, don't let it happen to yourself. It is hard when we're standing 7-metre sea kayaks on their end, trying to do an end pour. It usually takes about 3 or 4 blokes here to get a boat up on its end to do an end pour, but so worth it because you get such a better product. Righto, so I've got my 100 mils of polyester resin here, and then I'm going to get out my Q cells. Don't use it without a mask. I mean, you do not want to be mixing this stuff without a mask. And I'm going to thicken this until it's at the point that I can, get around about 200 mils or 200 grams of this, 200 mils, sorry, of this thickened resin. And I'm just going to catalyze it at 1%, pour it into the end, and just leave it till tomorrow. There's no coming back to it this afternoon. I'm not even going to test it. A good policy though is keep hold of your cup and so you can go and gauge how tough it is before you go stand that kayak down. If you lay that kayak horizontally after you've poured this into it and it hasn't set, it's going to go right in through your boat. Not a good idea. It's all been done. How do I know? We've all done it.
Okay, so I've got my resin. I've catalysed it at 1%. No more. It's going to go off. It might take a little bit longer, particularly with the cold water, but I just want to have a nice even pour down into the nose of that kayak. So I'm going to basically pour it from the deck side so that it falls straight onto where it needs to go in. And because it's going to get a little bit messy, I'd like to do it straight down the center line where my pillar's going to be, so it won't be visible or as visible as it otherwise could be. So you give your Q cell mixture. It's pretty liquid because I want it to pour. Make a spout like this and then pour. Okay, and then as I said, keep the cup with the residue in it, because then you'll know if it's gone off down in there.
Okay, you remember I said don't throw the cup out that you put the filled resin into. So in here, it's a pretty good chance that because that's gone off, that has as well. The defining factor, however, is that that's sitting in a bowl of water. So I've left it another hour. The reason why I've left it another hour is because it has a lower temperature in there and it could easily have taken a lot longer to set. I'm pretty confident that it's okay now. I don't want to move that boat to the horizontal plane until I know that that's gone off. Now I can't reach that, so I'm relying on my test cup to make sure that it's gone off. We're getting to the business end of this boat now. You'll notice I strapped it up, because the last thing you want is for something to fall over right at the very last thing when you've done all this hard work. So, and that's around about 10 kilos, maybe 11 kilos, not bad for a boat of this size. Still got a little bit of work to do. Still got to put the center pillar in, which weighs next to nothing. They're only about 150 grams, 200 grams each, and a seat and a backrest, and then some foam blocks, and she is done. Now comes the scary part of the build. Got to start drilling holes in a perfectly good boat. It's the one thing we all hate doing. Anyone making a boat, the last thing you want to do is drill a hole in it, but I have to drill some mounts into this boat, and one of those sits right here on the bow, another one on the stern, and what they are, they're grab loops, so that in the event that the owner is separated from his boat, he can grab hold of a strap and take that boat back to shore, empty the water out, get back in and continue on with his day. The last thing you want is something like this, full of water, which would weigh, I imagine, half a ton of salt water, careering in the surf with no rider in it, full of water, and you can imagine the consequences of that. So I put a grab loop, a rope loop in the deck on the bow and the stern. A lot of guys use leash mounts. I believe the rope to be a little bit stronger. It's not relying on a tiny little stainless steel pin. It's a big rope that's actually physically glassed into the center pillar, so that it's got a lot of hold. And being rope as well, if it were to hit him or someone else in the surf, it's not going to debark skin. So the first thing we do is we determine the center line of the boat. Now, because it's a round curved surface, unfortunately it has to be pretty much done by eye. So I pretty much have to eye off whether I've got the center of the boat there, and then come up to the end here, stand back a bit, decide whether or not that's the center. Pretty much here, and then I'll just push this down, and then do a double check. By standing back, I can get a better view of whether or not I have a center line. And the same deal on the rear. Now, it's a little bit easier to work out the center line of the back of this boat because I have a center fin, which I know is in the middle of the, smack bang in the middle of the boat. Find the center. So now I've determined the center line of the surf kayak. I now need to make some marks where I'm going to mount these leash points. And these leash points are actually a rope around about 15 centimeters long. It's an 8mm braided rope. And what it does is it actually inserts in through the deck of the kayak and into holes in the foam pillar. And the reason why they go into the foam pillar is because I use that as a plug to pour resin into to encase the rope so that it can never be pulled out. So I need to determine the point of where they are, and I always mount them 30 centimeters towards the cockpit, and then at 24 centimeters at 6 centimeters apart. Now that gives me a very good size loop with which to attach webbing that then extends past the boat here. And the reason why it extends past the boat here is if our surfer grabs hold of that rope and the boat's spinning, the boat will spin without him getting his hand caught here. You don't want to have too short a rope here because you could actually break your hand. So having it back here allows this boat, if I'm holding onto a rope here or a piece of webbing, it will spin freely. I also tie knots in that so he can't get his fingers caught in it to lose his fingers. So there's lots of things to think about when you're putting attachments on kayaks, particularly those that are used in whitewater and surf. Typically they must be flush with the deck and at a point where they're not going to abrade you or hurt you should they come across your skin in a tumbled environment like a washing machine or a surf zone. I'll come up 30 centimeters and I'll make my marks, and because I've determined my center line, I can make a cross, and there's my two holes. So that's how I go about locating my leash points on the fore and aft of the boat, so you can see it up there on the front. And now I've determined that, I can drill my 4 holes and then get on with preparing the surface for gel coating. And note that I'm leaving the masking tape on the deck here. If I do that, I'll actually less chance of chipping this. You've got to be very careful with a drill of this length. Don't drill through into the hull And that has been done, not by me, but I've seen it done. So very carefully, drill my hole. And then I can remove the tape. Okay, so these are the rope loops I'm going to insert into the deck here. And they're going to go in like so. The problem is that this was a hard mounted piece of aluminium or stainless, and that would have hit you in the surf. You'd likely break an arm with that, even though the boat's full of water. Something protruding like that could be extremely dangerous. I use this rope that's as tough as nails, but what I need to do is I need to burn the end of this rope here and make a small plug. Firstly, I'm going to seal the end of the rope. You could use a hot knife. I do have a hot knife here, but by putting this little plug on the end and I sort of finish it nicely, I'm essentially providing a mushroom that's going to lock into the gel coat that I'm going to pour into the foam pillar when I install it. So I'm sort of getting prepared here for an install of the foam pillar and the gel coat plug or resin plug that I'm going to pour in here, both at the same time, and I'll do the same thing at the back. This stuff is incredibly strong. It'll never break down, and we are yet in 15 years of using this method had one snap, even in some pretty extreme conditions. We've never had one pull out. We have actually had board leash mounts, like little stainless pin plastic board leash mounts that we used to put inside some of these boats. We have had them go on us, and that's been a major problem because it actually tears a hole out of the boat as well as the pin and everything else. So because we've got holes here and we're going to pour resin in here, the last thing we want to do is have a big overflow of gel coat over here and making a mess. So we've got a bit of a method where we make a couple of very nice little masked off sections. It takes a bit of work to do, but we do it so they're nice little squares. And you'll notice the 6 centimeters is more determined by the width of my masking tape. So the trick is we tape horizontally, and then we tape the length of the boat. Like so, leaving these nice neat little squares. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to prepare this surface here with my Dremel. So you can imagine this being in here with some nice little black gel coat squares here. Definitely just a neat way to finish up. I need to now prepare this area here because at the moment if the gel coat flows out it's just going to chip away and still look messy. So I need to sand this, and I'm going to use a Dremel with a little stone grinding tip on the end. Now it's worth noting, on our rotational molded version of this boat, of this model, we used to use an aluminum or aluminium plate like this, and we polish this up to a mirror finish, and that'd be mounted there with a recessed cup underneath. Look, it was a beautiful system. The issue was that we couldn't slide the center pillar all the way up here. It actually, because the pillar actually interfaces with the deck and the hull, it left a void here, which could lead to some stress on the boat. And ultimately, having this, if I were to bend this up, which I could bend this up and still have it mounted. Once again, that hitting you in the surf would be enough to debark you and do some serious damage. So the rope idea seems to still carry a lot of merit. I'm pretty happy with the way it works out. So I'm going to get some gogs on, and we'll give this a grind up and clean it up. So the center support pillar of these surf kayaks is actually a foam 50mm wide low density foam. And why it's low density is because we want as light as possible and reasonably flexible. We don't want anything too rigid inside the boat because that could cause a shear point, and obviously under a tremendous amount of load could actually cause cracking of the hull and the deck. So we purchased this foam in sheets, in large sheets, from a company called Sekisui Pilon in Australia, and they import this foam. In fact, they do make a number of different foams, but this is called LD29. It is a British foam. It is very, very light. I buy it with the skin on it. They will scrim the skin off it if I request them to, but I like it with the skin on it because it ensures that it stays nice and closed cell. It's so light with this stuff, but it forms a really nice rigid shape inside this boat. Now there are other types of foams like this one here, quite heavy. That will be about 3 times heavier in a sheet as this will be. So this LD29, and I used to buy it with 2 layers, one smaller layer of a higher density foam on each side as a laminate. I've found that this is actually better for the purpose, and I don't get delamination of the foams on hot days here in Australia. Now it was okay when we were making them for the cooler climates in the UK and Europe, but our climate's just way too hot, and when you get a lot of sun on a boat sitting on the beach for hours on end, there's a good chance the outer layers of that foam will peel off, and ultimately we'll end up with just a block of foam anyway, as we've seen here. So I have some templates that I'm going to lay up on this, and I'll get my bandsaw and I'm going to cut these pieces out and slide them straight into the boat. Okay, so I've got my center pillars cut. Now these need to be inserted into the kayak like so. This one goes in right up into the bow like so, and that one goes into the stern. Now that can be a little bit more challenging than it might look. Because of the curvature, you're actually forcing it in place. Now the problem also is that I need to line it up exactly with these holes here to make sure that when I drill into the pillar, those 2 holes are going to be right in the center of this pillar. As you can see, I've inserted the center pillar in, and it's roughly in the middle. And along here, I can just see it here. So what I'll do is I'll make a small indentation in the foam, just so I know relatively where that hole's going to be. But I still don't know whether I'm off to the side or I'm in the center or whatever. So what I'll do is I'll get some masking tape, like so, and you can see here, it's a good job I didn't drill there, but what it does do is it gives me the opportunity to put some masking tape that's going to be in there forever inside the boat. But what I do is I actually put it exactly down the center, where those holes lie, like so, and then I'll draw a line straight down the center. Now I know what I'm looking for is that position there. Line it up within the center. And that's how I find my dead center. To glue this in, I find that I use a good quality marine flex, a Sikaflex, like a 292 Sikaflex, which is actually an adhesive sealant, not just a sealant. You don't want to just use like a window sealant. You need to have an adhesive product to glue in items like this. I use marine flex, which is a waterproofing and basically a performance adhesive. It's a little bit cheaper than Sikaflex, and you know, to be honest, it's a lot more readily available. But I need to apply this to a couple of areas of this pillar, and that is firstly along the bottom. So I'll do a nice big heavy bead. I'll only go to around about halfway because I'm going to actually apply some to the actual hull of the kayak as well. because it's going to be a little bit hard if I put it all over it. There's a good chance I'm going to mess up the area around his seat, and I've learnt this from experience. And then I'll put a little bit here on the top. So I'll basically put it in as much as I can. And then the one thing I'm going to do is I'm then going to put some on the hull and then on the deck to get this last bit. I don't want to put it up here, because if I go putting it up here, I'm going to end up with all over that nice clean coaming that I prepared earlier. And you know, this stuff, as you all know, goes absolutely everywhere. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to basically put it on the boat itself. You can see here I've actually marked, and where the peel ply was here, it wasn't quite far enough, but it's okay. I've given that a preparation. I gave it a wipe with acetone, and it comes right down to here. And then I've also got it up underneath. So now I can install that pillar. Okay, so you remember I didn't put any there. That's that piece. And then the stuff up underneath is this piece here. It's my way of controlling the mess as I insert this in, so I can actually get it in here into place without making any mess at all. Ha! Must have done this before. It's perfect. I'm pretty happy about that, because there's nothing worse than stuffing this part of the job up. Alright, that centre pillar is now in place, and it's lined up with my two holes at the end, and a really good way for me to make sure it's not going to move is put a screwdriver in it, and that'll stay solid there forever. And then to install the rear pillar, I'm going to do a similar thing that I did with the forward one. I have to be careful I'm not going to make too much mess, so I start off by putting some on the base here, which is actually the bottom of the pillar. It's a bit of a complicated process, because I don't want to smear this stuff all over his beautiful carbon inside his boat. So I've got to be careful how I action it. And then I put it along here. Now this is actually along the fin box, so I have it on the base, but I can't put it on the top because I'm going to be rolling it up into place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put it up under the back deck. It requires me to pull the pillar into the upright position from this side. So I'm going to start the glue on this side just off center, so that as it smears into place, it'll actually hold it in place. Now I've got my center line there, so we slide this all the way in without touching the bottom. Because there's none on the top, it's going to basically slide into the upright position. And then I'll leave a screwdriver dead smack bang in the center to make sure it doesn't move while it sets.